This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 427, entitled Parliamentary Gender Equality Committees. Description. This flyer predicts that a few years after angry, hateful masculism has spread widely through whole countries, parliamentary gender equality committees will be set up that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, who push both feminist and masculist agendas equally, creating a biconscious society where women are forced to fip up or be severely punished by men by not getting one, thus forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spat at. These committees will then profoundly restructure and socially engineer the gender roles so that men do not need to go on a sex war to menfair the gender laws, to free themselves from decades of man-slavery by hated fluffy parasites and the even more hated fluffy feminist hypocrites. Now the flyer itself. Parliamentary Gender Equality Committees by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer thinks ahead a few years, imagining how masculist politics will unfold once men have become collectively angry at feminazi bitchery, at fluffy feminists, at fluffy feminist hypocrites, etc., and have put their masculist foot down, forcing governments to make basic changes in the way society is governed. Otherwise there will be a masculist revolution. Masculist soldiers will go on a sex war, assassinating the gender politicians for creating the deeply misandrous laws in the first place, murdering thousands of fluffy feminist hypocrite divorce court lawyers and judges. And if the sex war really heats up, masculist soldiers will go out into the streets and simply shoot millions of feminazi bigots for being indirect genociders, indirectly wiping out whole populations due to their fluffy feminist hypocrite takeover of the divorce courts, making divorce and hence marriage so toxic for males that in many countries now 2/3 of young men reject marriage and paternity, choosing to live the lifestyle of the MGTOWs, that's men going their own way, who spend their money on themselves, treating fluffies, that is traditional women, who expect to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man, with hateful contempt, spitting at them in public for being, quote, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin, to be severely punished, since women now have a career window of half a century. So, as say the masculists, now that women can work, they must work. Anything else is manslavery, and manslavery will eventually get women killed, because the main effect of masculist consciousness raising is that masculisted men see fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery, which is hated. So masculists have a hatred for fluffy manslaving parasites and an even greater hatred for fluffy feminist hypocrites who want equal rights with men in the parliaments but behave as fluffy manslaving parasites in the divorce courts, thus rejecting equal obligations with men by not bothering to fip up, that is, become FIP, financially independent person, by bothering to get a career competent education at high school and college so that she is a financially responsible FIP as an adult, who feels morally obliged to pull her weight financially and not expect to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him for decades, a major gender crime by her against her stupid, ignorant manslave. The basic difference between the two major branches of the men's lib movement, that is the MGTOW and the masculists, is that the MGTOWs are politically passive, in brackets, seen by the masculists as apolitical wimps, who passively, unconsciously don't question the existence of the gender status quo, that is, the monoconscious, that is, when one has had only one's feminist consciousness raised. Bigotry of most feminists today, who financially massacre and destroy the lives of one father in four in the hated, fluffy feminist, hypocrite-controlled divorce courts. The masculists tend to be a generation older than most MGTOWs, who are usually in their 30s and 40s. The masculists are often in their 60s and 70s. In brackets, I'm 73 at the time of writing, April 2021. The MGTOWs are too young to have lived through the major gender political transitions that women went through in the late 60s and 70s, getting really angry at how men oppressed women, then banded together into feminist consciousness-raising groups and later into feminist-inspired political groups, pushing as feminist lawyers and feminist lawmakers to legislate major changes in the laws that had major impact on women's private lives. In brackets, the personal is political. The politically minded feminists, for example, members of NOW, N-O-W, National Organization for Women in the US, pushed for and obtained the legislation of equal pay for equal work for women, equal rights for women to enter the professions, fault-free divorce, the abortion right, aka that's also known as the MARA, M-A-R-E-R, equals maternity rejection right, and set up gender equality committees in parliaments in most countries of the world. In those days, there was very little in the way of masculist consciousness, since the traditional role of the man, that is, to be a manslave to a woman, working for her for decades of his life, was so unquestioned, so unconscious, that nearly all feminists took it for granted. So when these feminists took over the divorce courts in the 70s and beyond, they unconsciously, unquestionably brought their fluffy feminist attitudes and expectations of men with them, seeing men's roles as manslaves to women who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. These fluffy feminist hypocrite-controlled divorce courts are now so toxic for divorcing fathers that the masculists are pushing for the creation of masculist groups in every high school, every campus, so that young men can put enormous moral pressure on young women to fip up or be severely punished by young men refusing to give them their sperm until the gender laws are menfaired, especially in the divorce courts, and the paternity rejection right is legislated. Brackets, the lack of which is the greatest form of sexual discrimination that exists. That is not against women, but against men, which causes millions of men to be manslave for decades, paying for a kid he does not want. Masculists are angry. Masculists are fighters. They differ markedly this way from the apolitical wimpiness of the MGTOWs, who passively, unquestioningly accept the gender status quo of feminist dominance when it comes to gender politics, thus ensuring that nothing changes with that feminist gender political dominance. This attitude of the MGTOWs is contemptible to the masculists, who sneer at the apolitical wimpiness of the MGTOWs. The masculists agree with Marx, who is famous for saying, quote, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." End quote. The masculists are out to destroy the gender political dominance and monopoly of the feminists by creating a large, angry, hateful male population who feels a real hatred against the massive gender injustices committed by women, with their unconscious, unquestioned assumption that men are manslaves to serve women, to work for women for decades. The core idea of masculism is that it is a rebellion by men against being man-slaves to women, working for women for decades. Masculists put powerful moral pressure on women to fip up or pay a horrible price for by being forced to be manless, thus loveless, sexless, babyless, and as masculist ideas spread through the world, spat at for being fluffy, parasitical manslavers, utterly rejected by men and forced to rot on the shelf. In the UK, I read recently, young British men increasingly care more about the level of fitness of a potential girlfriend than they do about her looks, which is a very strong statement, since for millions of years young men have always looked for prettiness in women, since men have it in their DNA to prefer to mate with pretty women, since nature has evolved prettiness to correlate with good genes that will promote the survivability of a man's kids if he mates with a pretty woman, that is, a woman with high quality genes. These masculistic young men are looking at these potential girlfriends with a very cold eye, asking themselves, quote, "Is this woman looking to parasite off my money in the future? Does she see me as some stupid, gullible future manslave whom she can parasite off, living off my money and labour, who herself has not bothered to fip up? Has she chosen to be a fluffy crapper by choosing to major in fluffy crap subjects at high school, so is obliged to study more fluffy crap majors at university, so ends up with a fluffy crap diploma that dooms her to becoming a hated, fluffy manslaving parasite in her 30s when she realises that her fluffy crap diploma precludes her from earning a good salary, so that in her 30s, in brackets, after screwing around in her 20s with, stats show, having had some 40 different penises in her by the time she is 30, close brackets, she will start looking around for some gullible, manslavable man to work for, to pay for her, to live in a middle-class house that she raises her kids in, with him keeping the whole family afloat financially. After she has got her house and her 2 kids, in about half of cases she will get bored with her 41st penis husband and drag him through the hated, fluffy, feminist-dominated divorce court system, ripping his kids away from him with a 90% probability, taking his house to raise her kids in it, taking half his wealth and stuff from him, forcing him to pay for kids he will barely see, for example, 2 weekends a month. And if his ex-wife is a real fluffy manslaving parasite, he may be forced to pay her alimony for life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat, parasitic manslaving ass and fip up, thus financially crucifying him and destroying his life. Thanks to the manosphere, that is, the MGTOWs, the MRAs, that is, men's rights advocates, activists, and the masculists on the internet, millions of young men have now had their masculist consciousness raised and are looking at potential girlfriends with a masculist's viewpoint. They are learning a real hatred for fluffy manslaving parasites and want nothing to do with them. A young woman who gains the reputation in her social circle of expecting to be a fluffy manslaving parasite increasingly suffers the kiss of death in terms of getting a quality male to take any interest in her. Increasingly, young men spit in her face for being a hated, manslaving, fluffy parasite, utterly rejected by young men, especially the quality young men who, due to their superior intelligence, are the first to go MGTOW or masculist. Increasingly now, young women are really starting to panic as they find with boyfriend after boyfriend that these young men refuse to give them their sperm, thus forcing these women to be babyless. Masculists preach to these young women that they should learn to hate the fluffy feminist hypocrites who control the divorce courts as much as men do, since it is the utter toxicity of these courts that is causing millions of young men to reject marriage and paternity, preferring to only sex women but not to marry them, and certainly not to give them kids, since only ignorant, stupid men accept the odds of 1 chance in 4 of being financially massacred and having his life destroyed in the hated, fluffy feminist dominated divorce court system. The masculists are pushing young women to vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, especially in the divorce courts, and for the legislation of the para, which will force women to grow up, to fip up, to become financially responsible adults, and not expect, fluffy style, to manslave a man, which will only make her hated and ostracised by society, as masculinist ideas take over whole populations, the way feminist ideas did in the 60s and 70s. This is the end of part 1.